You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Karaku, here today bringing you another paper that we will read and discuss. My mind ran on Maurice Bishop this week. I was thinking about being a kid when the invasion occurred. I remember being a kid and thinking, why is big old America invading little old Grenada? And a part of it has to do with what we talked about a few weeks back, the Monroe Doctrine that America has in this Western Hemisphere. There was beliefs that, Grenada was dealing with the communists. And so that was a part of why America got involved. Also, to be honest, a couple of Caribbean countries in the region asked for America to step in. At least that's what America claims was the reason why they stepped in. The claim was that Grenadians were dying, the army was killing people, this, that, and the other. And Bishop died in that too. And so, I always remembered that, and I thought about it again when we talked about the Monroe Doctrine. Right, and it's been on my mind for a little while, so I decided let's talk about revolution in Grenada. Let's read this interview by Maurice Bishop. So I see Dorico Cooper Photography is here, saying peace family, peace to you, Dorico. Glad you could join. Thanks for that little stock tip earlier today. I made sure I jumped on it, so I appreciate that. You guys want advice on investing, especially in this cryptocurrency age, hop on the Discord. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. Just click that link, download the Discord app if you don't have it. Click that link, hop on in the Discord server and ask where to find information. You'll be pointed in the right direction. So peace to that brother for being here today. So we're going to talk about revolution in Grenada, an interview with Maurice Bishop. Before I get into the paper, I want to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network. I know you guys must be tired of hearing me say this, but I got to do what I got to do. There are other shows on the podcast network that you should be checking out.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community. Only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, sir. Make sure also check out the Queen's Council podcast. In fact, I just came off a little bit of a discussion on Twitter with the Pro-Black Perspective and the Harsh Reality Podcast is D-Web talking about Dogecoin. How many of you were in the Dogecoin game the last couple of days? By the way, if you follow me on social media, something you'll notice about me, I don't have a lot of bandwidth for going back and forth with people. I asked a question earlier. What's your strategy for the hodlers, the people who are holding on for their life, right? Called hodlers, HODL, hodlers for short, right? What's your strategy? And you know, respectfully, someone who follows me on Twitter was like, well, isn't the strategy to hold it? Listen, a holder holds until they decide not to hold. And when you decide not to hold, what is your strategy going forward? Right? Holders don't just hold till the day they die. At least that's not the intention. The intention is to hold until, you know, this stock or this crypto, whatever it is, peaks, right? Or until you have, and this is my strategy, until you have life-changing amounts of money, right? And then you're not a holder anymore. So there's a strategy to it. What is your strategy? How long are you going to hold on to your coin, right? Or your stocks or whatever. But I don't have the bandwidth to go back and forth with people, so I don't. Right, but that's what I'm talking about when I ask, what's your strategy as a holder? You're gonna hold it until what? And then what are you gonna do? Do you sell all of what you're holding, or you sell enough to change your life in the moment, right? And then leave some back in case there's more water to be wrung out of that towel? What do you do? So that's what I'm talking about. Black Excellence is here, and Black Excellence says when it hits my target or near, I will sell and invest in my monthly dividend stocks. And that's what I'm talking about. That is a strategy, and that's a person who's telling you that they're a holder. NYC Beauties is here saying I will keep some. Right? You're not a holder unless you die, you know, unfortunately early or something like that. The idea is that you hold on to a certain point, right? What's your target, by the way, right? What is your target amount? Is it a hard set dollar amount, or is it more so whatever amount that comes along that could change your life? And by change your life, I mean you can then go and pay off all your debt. You could then go put a down payment on a house. You could get that new car you wanted. What is it? You could move and go back to Africa. What is it, right? So I had that back and forth. Well, it really wasn't a back and forth. I just stopped talking about it. But you know, that's what I'm talking about when I say, what is your strategy as a holder, right? Anyway, enough of the talk. If you guys have any stock tips, put them in the chat. I know Dorico is always good for it. Dorico put up some ETFs to invest in. I made sure I did my due diligence, put my investments in today. And again, folks, you don't have to put in full stock market prices or share prices. You could, with Robinhood app and stuff like that, you can be putting in fractions. You can put in a tenth of what the stock is, you know. You see what Black Excellence just said? Paid off my credit card with the money I made last week. That's what I'm talking about, right? The Pro Black Perspective is in the room. You guys make sure to check out the Pro Black Perspective podcast. Check out their channels. Make sure to subscribe. Click the bell to be notified when they have new stuff going on. Only time I say from the Pro Black Perspective talked about, they went over Urugu chapter 2. So you guys go check that out. That was earlier today. I checked it out earlier today. It was a pretty good show. NYC Sports Archives is here saying greetings, family. Greetings to all of you who are here with me live tonight. But by all means, you got some stock tips or whatever, put them in the chat room. Let other folks be able to enjoy your tips, right? Pause. Revolution in Grenada, an interview with Maurice Bishop on March 13th, 1979. The people of Grenada, led by the People's Revolutionary Army, the PRA, overthrew the government of Eric Gary. The following interview was granted by Maurice Bishop, Prime Minister of the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada, to Caribbean Life and Times. Grenada correspondent Alistair Hughes and special assignment editor John Redmond. The article below was reprinted from the December 1979 issue of Caribbean Life and Times. Caribbean Life, by the way, is still out here. You can still find that newspaper out here, right? Right, so that's just a side note. It was perhaps appropriate that the first questions put to Grenada's premier concerned his introduction to politics. Maurice Bishop said that he had first become politically conscious while he was at secondary school, the Presentation College in Grenada, particularly after he had finished his ordinary levels in 1960. So ordinary levels refers to the British exam, the GCE exam. We colloquially call it the O levels. There's a higher level called the A level, which is like an associate's degree, right? So he's talking about in secondary school, when you graduate from high school, the last exam you used to take was the GCE, the O levels, or the ordinary level. I know in my hometown they changed it my last year when I graduated from high school, and they made it into a Bahamian version of another British exam called the GCSE. So we had the BGCSE when I graduated. So I'm just giving you some background on what that means for those of you who don't know. The ordinary levels is a British exam you took at the end of high school. He got heavily involved in the political activities that were available. President of the Historical Society and the Students' Council, editor of the students' newspaper, and president of the Debating Society. You will find this common amongst those guys who became the first and second prime ministers of those newly independent Caribbean countries. They were part of some organization, and that's the thing a lot of our folks don't understand. You don't listen to folks who are uninitiated, who haven't passed through some type of organization, right? Even if it's just a high school one, right? You'll find this common amongst the Pinlings, the bishops, etc. After leaving college in 1962, in the 9 months prior to going to London to study law, he had been involved along with people like Bernard Cord in the formation of the Grenada Assembly of Youth After Truth, which was intended to be a bridge between the secondary schools in the country, particularly Grenada Boys Secondary School, college, convent, and high school. The four main schools where there was a lot of competition in a very foolish and sectarian way. In London, in September 1963, continued his political involvement with the West Indian Students' Union and the Standing Conference for West Indian Organizations. As to what shaped his political thinking, the Prime Minister said that there were several things. In the early 1960s, there had been the independence movement, the anti-colonial movement, which was picking up momentum after the independence of Ghana and the breakup of the West Indies Federation and the subsequent emergence of African and Caribbean states. They had spent that period following, quote, the struggles in Ghana, the writings of Nkrumah, the struggles in Algeria, the situation with Ben Bella and people like that, end of quote. The Cuban Revolution in 1959 had been a watershed, and they followed very closely the speeches and activities of Fidel Castro, Che Guevara in particular. The period in England had been important, he said, as it focused in a very direct way on the whole question of racism in practice and helped, he thought, to develop an anti-racist perspective and to get a better feel for the problems of the working class, the poor, and oppressed. The Declaration of UDI in Rhodesia had brought home to him the hypocrisy of British colonialism and the maneuverings of imperialism generally. When contrasted with the British response to Anguilla, it had brought home very forcefully how things operate in practice. Right? So this is a map of Grenada, a very small island, very mountainous. A lot of my friends are from Grenada, actually. Cool people, good people, Yeah. So this brings us to a section called the Decisive Influence. So we got a general idea of what was his influence, but now we're going to talk about the decisive influence. In the chat room, I see Dorica Cooper says, hold to buy a custom dome house, cash or close to it. Save some to pass on to the next generation, right? That's his strategy, right? I'd like to hear more about that custom dome house though, right? So the decisive influence for Maurice Bishop. During the period of the emerging cultural nationalist feelings in America, the Black Power revolt of the late 60s was a fairly decisive influence in that it raised the whole question of the role of the black man. While he thought that most of them had moved beyond cultural nationalism and had begun to identify matters more concretely in terms of class rather than race, nevertheless, the racial factor at that time was very important, and he did not believe that any of them would negate altogether the importance of racism as an outgrowth of capitalism, and therefore as a continuing influence in the context of imperialism. Question as to who had been his ideal as a young man, Prime Minister Maurice Bishop said that there had not been any one single person, and it depended on different periods. He had concentrated at one time his attention on Frantz Fanon, and on Malcolm X, Fidel and Che, and as he mentioned, in Nkrumah and his writings. Later, they began to look more and more at the works of Lenin and many different socialist and progressive thinkers. So this is something you'll find heavy in the Caribbean in the 70s and 70s and early 80s. Like I've mentioned before, I had an uncle myself who was leader of a socialist party back in my hometown. And he's in the age group with Bishop and them, right? This is what those guys did. Those guys visited with Castro in Cuba, you know, so a lot of folks in the Caribbean at this time took on heavy socialist leanings, right? So it's not uncommon. Later, they began to look more and more at the works of Lenin and many different socialist and progressive thinkers. Had his return to Grenada indicated a new step in his political life? Prime Minister Bishop supposed it so. When he had returned to Grenada in March 1970, he had passed through Trinidad during the emergence of the Black Power revolt there, with the subsequent arrest and detention of several people on Nelson Island, including Grenadian Pat Emanuel. They had led a demonstration in Grenada expressing solidarity with their brothers in Trinidad. Gary's reaction had been that they had come back to be troublemakers and quote-unquote hot and sweaty. He had been projected rapidly into the political sphere. If there had been no Trinidad in 1970, it might have been postponed for a year or so. By the way, the belief or the understanding is that how does it go again? Is that Grenadian people are the ones who inhabited Trinidad. I think it's that way. It's not from Trinidad to Grenada. I think it's from Grenada to Trinidad. So that's the belief. So the belief there is that those people are kind of related. That one group, that one group came from the other, right? Kevin Care482 says Michael Manley from Jamaica was also allied with Castro. That's what I'm saying. In that time period, a lot of folks took meetings with Castro and followed those socialist and communist type thoughts at that time. Life with Nelly is in the room. Y'all say hello to Life with Nelly. She said good evening, so say good evening to her too. Right? Make sure to check out Life with Nelly as well. Right? Asked to be more specific, the Prime Minister remembered a number of incidents. The first demonstrations in May 1970 and Gary's Black Power speech in which he had spoken of, quote, steel cutting steel, end of quote, and the roughest and toughest roughnecks, and if your neighbor's house is on fire, wet yours. That's a saying back home too. If your neighbor's house on fire, go and check yours. He remembered Gary's identification of him when he had been nominated by students of Grenada Boys Secondary School for a commission of inquiry and been rejected by Gary. In June of that year, they had begun the newspaper Forum, named after a similarly named organization. The newspaper had lasted 7 or 8 months. Later in the year, he had been involved in the nurses' demonstration and was arrested and charged with riot and incitement to riot. From 1971 onwards, there had been the African Liberation Days, and he had been nominated and accepted as a member of the Caribbean African Liberation Support Committee. It had been the start of developing regional and international links. This is why it's good to read about your ancestors. Because you know, you get to see these guys weren't slouches. These guys were developing organizations, right? Jumping between organizations. These guys were involved, right? What are we doing? At the nurses' demonstration, 10 trial lawyers had come from outside Grenada and had given him an opportunity to develop links with some of the progressive professionals in the Caribbean, such as Alan Alexander of Trinidad. And, you know, I talk about that on this show. Like, the thing you want to be doing, right, is you want to be giving yourselves opportunities to develop links with other folks who are fighting in the struggle, right? That's one of the things I want to do, and that's one of the things I hope that we'll start to see occur more often in the future. I know the Pro-Black Perspective has a Discord server as well that has a lot of people in it now, and every day gets a lot of different people. And the thing I want to see too for that server, for mines, whatever, just in general, I want to see for us is we started developing more links with folks, right? Like I've talked about in the past, like who's the number one, say, you know, Pan-African, African nationalist, like revolutionary group in Ghana right now? Who's the leader, right? What about Nigeria, right? What about in Jamaica right now, right? A lot of us, you know, because we live in America, and I know most of you listen to me live in the States, we kind of like, we kind of like by default become, you know, American centered. So we'll know about names like Myson and Tamika Mallory and this, that, and the other. What's homegirl name? Who's living it up now from BLM, right? A trained Marxist, but she's spending that bread though. You know, like we know about these folks, but what do we know about, you know, folks on the continent? You know, and you know, not just the popular countries, like who's doing what in the Congo right now? That's the kind of stuff I want to start engaging with those people more. I want to start having conversations here on this channel with some of those folks more too, you know, provided that I could communicate with them in a common language, right? But that's what we need to be doing. And you'll see that when you look up our ancestors, our elders even, because if Bishop wasn't killed, he could have very easily been around till now. These guys were definitely making those links, right, and discussing ideas between them, you know. So yeah, so let's continue. In March 1972, Joint Endeavor for Welfare, Education and Liberation, JEWEL, had been formed in the parish of St. David's by Unison Whiteman and Sebastian Thomas. Later in the year, others, including himself and Kendrick Radix, formed Movement for Assemblies of the People, or MAP. The two organizations began to work together in March 1973. And in March 1973 had merged in St. David's into the new JEWEL movement, right? You know, even speaking of organization, what's the major organization in your state or in your city right now? You guys in the chat room could tell me. Like, what's the major black organization, you know, that's making the most sense, right? Or has the most people following in your you know, in your local area? Let me know that in the chat room. So we come to the section called a need for change. On the thrust of the movement, Mr. Bishop said that they had seen themselves as political organization and had gone around proclaiming the need for change to revolutionize the economy, the politics, and the society of the country. Their position had been very clear that people had the right to remove oppressive governments at a particular moment in time if those governments refused to respond to democratic activity or if they continued to rig elections, right? And that's what Bishop and them did. The New Jewel movement was an unconventional type organization, he said. It wasn't formed as an electoral political party, but was formed as a political party that was more aimed at raising consciousness and with the declared intention of taking political power in or out of elections if the accepted process did not allow for electoral change. This position had always been made clear. At their first big convention, People's Convention on Independence, they had said they were not proclaiming an anti-position on independence, but that the people had the right to be involved in the political process leading up to independence, including what kind of constitution, what went in the constitution, what kind of government after independence, etc. And that's sensible. And I question a lot of African nations that came forth after independence in the 60s. Did those folks really sit down, right, and have that conversation, right, that involved the people, right, so that the people had a say into what went into the Constitution, right, what kind of Constitution we're going to follow, what kind of government are we going to have after independence, etc. And I think a lot of African nations dropped the ball there by just kind of continuing with what the colonizers had in place previously. But when you talk about nation building, you want to get a consensus. Now, you're not going to be able to please everybody, and don't try. You want to be able to keep the majority satisfied with the terms and conditions of how you're constructing this new nation to continue. At that time, they were advocating the need for a new governmental structure, essentially premised on the assemblies model. They had not pushed the idea much subsequently, though. The basic idea of a new form of democracy, where you had democracy from the roots coming up, and not once in every 5 years for 5 seconds type Westminster democracy, was something that was still very close to him. Not once in every 5 years for 5 seconds type Westminster democracy was something that was still very close to him. In 1976, the New Jewel movement combined with the other two political parties, the Grenada National Party and the United People's Party, to form the alliance to fight the 1976 election. It was not altogether a happy alliance. After the election, the alliance held 6 seats. Gary and his party held 9. Was Maurice Bishop at this point thinking in terms of revolution? Quote, "Our position has always been very simple," he said. "Peaceful means, if possible, revolution if necessary." That's words you should live by right now. All of us listen to this episode should be living by those words right now. And you could kind of hear a little bit of the Malcolm X in that statement too. All right? Peaceful means, if possible, revolution if necessary. You can't be afraid of either. Asked if at that stage it still seemed that peaceful means were possible, the premier replied, quote, "Oh yes, I think so." He pointed out that despite the massive rigging of the election, the harassment and intimidation, etc., in a situation where a repressive government wanted to maintain power through rigging, once they stuck to a certain procedure, it was nonetheless possible to catch them at their own game. He also pointed out that more important than them feeling they could win through an election was the fact that they felt that the people felt that they could still do it by an election and therefore would not respond to a revolutionary call in the context of an armed takeover. Over the next 3 years, there had been further indications of Gary's determination to hold on to power at all costs. A number of laws were passed in this period, including the Essential Services Act of 1978, which in effect removed the right to strike for 11 of the most important categories of workers. Those kind of laws that refuse your right to strike, you have to always be very, very, very careful of those type of laws around you. That's when folks are looking to oppress you, right? In the chat room, Dorico Cooper Photography and the Pro-Black Perspective said good evening to Life with Nelly, which is cool. Dorico Cooper says dome homes are so well insulated that over a 20-year period, the savings on heating and cooling costs will pay for the cost of the house. So where I come from, they did have domed homes in small amount. This was back in the day, though. I'm not sure if those homes are still around, but it'll be worth looking into, right? There's a guide to dome homes that you guys could check out. I'll post the link in the chat. You guys could also check it out yourselves. These domed homes. Put that in the chat for you guys so you could know what Dorico Cooper Photography is referring to. KW Don 7 is with us. KW Don 7 says Patrice Khan Coolers, who is in a so-called union with a multiracial female. She used police brutality to carve out wealth for herself, much like Benjamin Crump, who receives 1/3 of every settlement he negotiates for. Yeah, Crump, I talk about Crump all the time. In fact, I've tagged him in some of the stuff I've said. Crump is a guy, I don't know why people keep calling this guy. These guys like Crump are only about settlements and not really about justice. Now, I'm not going to knock a settlement, but I'll tell you something. Frankly, my children's lives are worth more than any settlement. I want justice, and if I have to take that justice myself, so be it. But I want justice. Right? Settlements are cool, right? But who's paying those settlements really? It's taxpayers paying those settlements. So we get so not only are we seeing our children and our friends as children being killed, but we're footing the bill. Right? There's no justice in them. But yeah, but Patrice Coolers, yeah, she gained the bag off of pretending to care about black men who are being killed and down, in the streets. As we've seen just recently, a couple of black men were killed again by police. Right? I have a question for you guys too. I'm trying not to be a prisoner of the moment type thing, but under Trump, right? So we have Biden now, there was Trump in the middle, and then Obama was on the other side, right? But under Trump, do you remember many black men being killed? I'm sure there was a couple, black men and women too. I'm sure there was a couple, but it seems like anytime you have Democrats in power, it seems like anytime you have Democrats in power, expect black people to be getting fucked up in the streets by cops. Let me know if it's just me, or if the incidences were the same, or is it that on the Democrats the incidences are amplified more? But to me, under Trump, it was like, you know, you had the one with the sister getting killed in her home. Around that time, there was an ex-military brother they killed, and they caught them on tape laughing. Who else? I mean, I guess George Floyd, I guess. Was Floyd? Yeah, I guess Floyd was under Trump too. But yeah, Dorico Cooper photography says not as many as under Obama. Yeah, and now, you know, here comes Biden and them, and looks like we're getting the gang back together. You know, that's something to keep your eye on too. By the way, Dorico Cooper just mentioned that he posted a link in the Discord for everyone. He says, keep in mind the cost of construction has gone up $10 to $20 per square foot due to inflation and rising costs of commodities. All right. You guys make sure to click the link. I have it pinned at the top of the chat. It's also in the description, I do believe. You guys make sure to click the link, join the Discord today. All right. More under Democrats for sure, says Dorico Cooper. Let's continue the paper. We're at this section called Brutal Elements. Prime Minister Bishop said that they had begun to gather that with Gary, in discussions with some of his more brutal elements in his police and defense force, outright liquidation was increasingly discussed. Liquidation of the New Jewel movement leadership. As to when the government had started to acquire guns, pay attention, Maurice Bishop would not answer, although he did indicate he might give an answer in a year's time. The vital spark for the revolution came in March, on Sunday, March 10th, right? While at a meeting in St. George's, they got word that the police and the defense force were on their way to the homes of the leadership. Bernard Cord, Unison Whiteman, Vince Noel, Kendrick Radix, and Maurice Bishop, and that the plan was to detain them after searches. Vince Noel was not at the meeting, so he could not be forewarned. Quote, we decided to make ourselves unavailable, he said. In hiding on the Monday morning, they got word that Gary was leaving the country at midday, and had left orders to find them and wipe them out. You know, in Grenada right now, there's still Gary people and there's still Bishop people. So quote unquote Gary people, quote unquote Bishop people, right? Quote, that raised right away the whole question of whether we should sit down and hope that it wasn't true, or whether we should organize, or whether we should ourselves organize to make a strike. After many hours of discussion, I would say anything like between 10 to 1, we decided to move. And that's how you gotta be. That's how you gotta be. And I wouldn't have taken so long. I wouldn't have taken no many hours either. All right, you got to get organized. All right, you have to get organized. All right, you got to strike while that iron is hot too. Don't get God out here. Prime Minister Bishop explained that 2 leading comrades were sent for, and plans were laid that they should meet at the hill next to the barracks of the defense force that night after 10 o'clock. About 46 men prepared to use arms and willing to fight were mobilized. 46 men, right? I can tell you right now, Grenada, especially at this time we're talking, Grenada didn't have no more than 300,000 people on that island. In fact, it might have just been around 200,000, right? Let me see something. And the point I'm trying to make is that 46 people, like right now in Grenada, you have 113,000 people. That's right now, right? Grenada is a small place, right? You didn't need everyone to show up next to the barracks. 46 men, not even 50 people, right? and they made their move. And that's the thing we got to keep in mind. We don't need everyone. We need as much as we can get, but we don't need everyone. Right? Get as much as you can get and get to work. Right? As the Prime Minister describes it, the attack on the Defense Force barracks at True Blue was fairly unsophisticated. Soon after 4 a.m. on the morning of the 13th, they opened fire on the barracks. As far as the Prime Minister is aware, there was no return fire. They just took off. From there, they went to Radio Free Grenada. And when the staff arrived for work, put out a call to the people to respond. The call on the radio resulted in a quote unquote massive mobilization around the country. So there's a couple things we're seeing here, right? Got to be armed, got to have a way to communicate to the masses, right? He remembers that there was a press conference at between 4 and 4:30 that day, and by then it was more or less over. As for the gains, Prime Minister Bishop thought that there were a number of achievements that could be listed very easily. They had created an estimated 1,000 jobs in terms of road work and additional construction work, and other programs started. They had moved into the agro-industrialization area. Various juices, mango, pawpaw, which is soursop to you guys who don't know. Mango, pawpaw, sorry. Pawpaw is pawpaw, I'm sorry. Soursop and sapodilla. Dilly is one of the best fruits you can eat from the Caribbean, by the way. Pawpaw, I meant to say, is papaya, not soursop. Pawpaw is papaya, right? Sapodilla. How many of you have had a sapodilla before? Let me pause to ask that question. How many of you, I'm sure you guys have had papaya. You can find that here in the States easy. How many of you have had sapodilla before, or what a Bahamian would call dilly? How many of you have had a dilly before? I'm just curious. Kevin Care42 says, forgot there was another mass shooting by an incel. Yep. White supremacists are on the fritz these last few weeks. I have never though saw Muzungus take so much L's like last week. But how many of you have eaten a dilly before? I'm just curious, since it was mentioned in the paper, right? So anyway, they had moved into the agro-industrialization area, various juices, mango, what you guys call papaya or pawpaw, soursop and sapodilla were being put out, though there were problems with the cans and labels. They had been able to get something like 109 scholarships for university education for students in Grenada. The repayment of the University of the West Indies debt had meant something like 25 students could go, and the 20 students who were already there would now have their economic costs paid. So he said he should enter a caveat on that, as he understood that the university had not registered all at that point. They had reduced school fees at secondary level to $25 per term. The school feeding program was also an important program in their view. They've been able to get hot lunches for quite a number of primary schools, and they hope to expand on that. They hope to integrate the government estates into the program by getting some of the provisions from them. Again, when you have a nation, man, or your nation building, you got to be able to take care of the basic needs of your people. That's how you're going to keep the peace. Kevin Care says he never heard of a sapodilla. Wow. And I know Kevin Care's from an island too. He's from, I know he's a Yachty, and I'm surprised y'all must have sapodilla in your country, right? But as I move on, KW Don 7 is also of Yachty heritage. Same thing with the pro-black perspective. You guys never heard of sapodilla before, or what we call dilly for short? That's surprising. Anyway. Quote, quite frankly, I can't remember half of them at this point in time, Prime Minister Bishop admitted. He thought it was important to see the progress they had made on the external front in terms of bringing back a certain measure of respect to the country in a short period of 6.5 months in terms of what they had been able to do at the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference. In terms of the Kaunda visit, in terms of the Non-Aligned Movement Conference, where among other things, they had been elected to the Bureau and where he had been chosen as one of the vice presidents to the conference. In terms, likewise, of the Grenada mini summit involving Grenada, St. Lucia and Dominica, in terms of the response they felt they had stirred in the heart and minds of Caribbean masses of the people by the revolution, and therefore the expectation with which people took for what is being said and done in and by Grenada at that point. Now, the thing with St. Lucia and Dominica and those guys actually helped with the invasion later on. Just keep that in mind. He also thought there were a number of internal indications. The number of young people who were anxious to go back to school in terms of the response of the population to their call for voluntary organization and mobilization to build back their communities, and the number of people's work brigades which have been formed around the country in response to their call. 22 in the parish of St. Andrews alone doing voluntary work on the weekends. They felt that Gary could not have had this effect except by coercing people, because they would not have seen any point in making sacrifices given the level of corruption and that sort of thing. He said there was a new feeling of dignity and sense of worth, of belonging in the population for the first time. All of these they saw as important indicators of the response of the people to the revolution. Asked about his attitude towards the press, the Prime Minister said, on the press question, our position is very clear. We do not accept the meaning of free and responsible press as interpreted by Torchlight and many other papers up and down the region. We don't accept it at all. We do not concede any right of the press to print or to reprint libelous and scurrilous material which they know to be untrue. The Torchlight had done that on several occasions. The Bunte article was a classic out of that West German magazine. They knew Grand Etang had not been deforested, also Grand Etang is an area, had not been deforested and roads pitched and missiles instilled in the hills. They knew there was no Russian naval base in Karaku. They knew there were no thousands or whatever figure was used of Cubans running around with arms and so on. So these guys were a part of the propaganda, right? The propaganda movement that led to, you know, the invasion later on. And people today will, in America, will talk about the, you know, how the Grenadian and, you know, the U.S. invasion of Grenada kind of shed light on their miscommunication or their communication capabilities, but we know that's a lie. We know that's a lie. They know exactly what was going on. They knew what was and what wasn't. But America jumps on that propaganda stuff to give it its excuse to invade these countries. And then afterwards, they'll hit you with a little oopsie, right? Like that cop did with that black man at the traffic stop. Oopsie. That's an old-time American excuse. Oh, oops. Wow, we thought there was weapons of mass destruction here. That's the only reason why we invaded. Bullshit. You knew better, you know, but that's the game. And Karaku is a small island off of Grenada. It's you know, in that map I showed earlier, they did show Karaku. It's off the main island. It's a small island off the main island. And as you recall, the way in which they chose to respond after printing the article is with an editor's note of one sentence, 1.5 lines probably, that said, "We know of the presence of some Cubans, but we cannot substantiate the other facts." I'm saying that is a very dishonest answer. Yeah, if the Grenadian people only knew at this point here what was coming, right? But that's how America operates, right? Some people will call that's the "I'm white and I say so." right? Right? We have evidence that you have weapons of mass destruction, what have you. No such thing, right? But they've used that already to do the deed. KW7 made a good point just on the chat room. He said Obama did the same thing with Libya. Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. That's an age-old American thing to do, right? And that's why also, right? I've said this before, but I'll say it again. That's why also, honestly, you know, and again, I'm Caribbean, but honestly, it's hard to even build in the Caribbean. I know that's a tough pill to swallow, because in this hemisphere, America has the power. And all they need is the excuse, right? You build a powerful, let's say you build a powerful Jamaica. America will be in there bombing Jamaica. You build a powerful Grenada, Bahamas, Haiti, especially. They'll be in there bombing that shit, right? Well, our proximity doesn't help us. And so, you know, as I've always said, it's going to be hard to move people, or to move their mindset, more importantly, from where they're from. But that's why we need a powerful Africa, right, to be our backup in such manner, you know, matters, right? You can acquire resources while in America, but let's be real, like let's say you invested in Dogecoin. That was a conversation me and D-Web and Pro Black Perspective was having a little bit earlier. Let's say you made a good deal of money off Dogecoin, and you now decide to buy up a bunch of buildings and houses and stuff and rent it out to make money. Great. But also understand something, that in America, these folks can just take your shit and throw any old, you know, sprinkle you with cocaine or something, and, you know, open and shut case, Johnson, right? That's how America can move. They could just throw any old shit on you and say, well, this is what you were doing. We had to go in there and take you out for the security of the nation. KW Don says the evidence of mass destruction was the fact that Saddam Hussein was moving away from the petrodollar. The same goes for Gaddafi. Yeah, that's all they need to hear. That's all they need to hear. They don't need much. And by the way, that's all the way over in the continent. In the continent, in the case of Gaddafi, in the Middle East, the quote unquote Middle East for Saddam, right? You got to understand the power dynamics that you're in, right? Do what you can do, but ultimately, we got to get up out of. We have to get up out of this, you know, out of the reaches of this place, or definitely have to build a power base where we have people, a power base that affords us some protection, definitely some retribution, right? So at this section called No Excuse. Before I read that section, let me take a quick station ID break. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Also, make sure to check out the Queen's Council podcast, also on KWAZ Radio. So chat room, nothing's happening. Let's continue. So no excuse. Quote, and it amounts to saying that as far as you are concerned, there is some truth in the article. End of quote. Now, even under conventional law, conventional legal system, leaving aside a revolutionary situation, you do not have the right to reprint libel. And if there's a libelous article and you choose to reprint it, you remain guilty. Torchlight should know that. If they don't, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Now, one of the things we had considered doing was to have all of them arrested for criminal libel, bring them before the courts on a criminal charge. That hasn't happened for a number of reasons. That's the first thing. The second, this is that we do not concede that a free and responsible press, so-called, has the right to distort news, to twist it, and to falsify it. And there are hundreds of examples that I can quote personally out of the Torchlight there, where that has been done. So the Torchlight was a paper that had alliances with Gary, by the way, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so they were anti-Bishop anyway, so they said whatever to make Bishop and them look bad, you know, to the people and to people outside as well, which is why certain Caribbean countries in that area got involved in the invasion. The third thing, we do not concede that they have the right as a free and responsible press, quote unquote, once more, to print only what they want to print. We feel that the role of a press, if they call themselves a national paper, and if they are free and responsible, is to print the news once it is not libelous or scurrilous, etc., or indecent, of everybody who writes, right? I can show you dozens of articles that have been copied to us, the jewel paper, that Torchlight has not printed. We have had the experience on several occasions where they have also refused to print what we have sent them, right? Now, these things, in our view, are not acceptable. Now, if you really are talking about freedom of the press, you have to overcome your prejudices to deal with certain realities. There is a revolution in the country. Revolution has made progress. There are national events taking place. If you are a serious paper, you have to carry these, whether you like it or not. And you can't just be highlighting what you want to highlight. Quote, detainees ball help, or some other such thing, right? Which is written from your narrow perspective or concern. The fourth question, we totally reject minority control of the press. Totally. We do not accept that it is correct. We don't care what happens in England or Canada. That's their business. We say in our situation, we reject it completely. Minority control of the press. Elaborating on this theme, Prime Minister Bishop said that they rejected entirely DMB Cromwell, managing director, and Trinidad Express, between them controlling 40-something% of the shares of Torchlight, because it meant that the only views you would get across consistently were the views of the Trinidad Express and of DMB Cromwell. You have to be in control of your narrative. Right? And that's the problem that Bishop and them encountered. They didn't control their own narrative. You can't rely on others, right, to transmit your message. You have to transmit it yourself. This is why people don't really trust BLM. Because people are looking at the money trail. Who's making the money and where is it coming from? Because whoever controls that money controls that message. If the message is, if you can't get your proper message out, you're not really communicating with your people. This is why we have to have our own black media. This is why I try to, I try to create, some fledgling media place where you could come to, and get some knowledge from knowledgeable folks. Don't sleep on D-Web and them from the Harsh Reality podcast. There they talk about what's going on in the news. They talk about hip hop and stuff like that. But those guys are no slouches intellectually, right? Same thing with the Queen's Council. Yeah, they talk about stuff that's going, you know, topical stuff that's going on. No slouches, right? And in fact, the way they discuss things is a breath of fresh air. Definitely don't sleep on Oni Tase from the pro-black perspective, right? And I'd like to get more people to be involved. And you don't have to talk about what we talk about. In fact, I'll appreciate it if you don't talk about what we talk about and talk about some niche, some niche topic that our people will resonate with, that they need to hear. Like some of you guys are in the Discord talking about investing, right? Some of you guys are talking about art, photography, filmmaking, this, that, and the other. There's a niche for you guys too, to be on this podcast network, doing your own thing, coming up with your own shows for us to tune into, where you're lacing us with some ideas. Be the voices that our people need to hear. And once you do it, and if you're around a show like this or the pro-black perspective, I know you guys are on the right page. You're gonna have the right message. You're gonna be talking the right stuff that our people need. You know, this is what we gotta be on. You know, this is what we have to be on. Wow, Dorico Cooper said something heavy here. I gotta deal with that in a second. All right, but this is what we gotta be on. You know, we constantly talk about things like we gotta technologize our people. One of the things, going back to this cryptocurrency stuff, we talked about on that show when Dorico Cooper and Machiavelli and them were on the show, and Kevin K42. A part of our problem as black folks is that we don't have the people on the front line so much working for our people, by the way, to inform us of these things. If we had people who we could trust and who are knowledgeable, who could come to us and say, listen, you ain't got to understand Bitcoin, but right now it's worth a couple of pennies, which is where it started, just like Doge. I remember when Bitcoin was $1.50. And because I didn't understand it, I didn't buy any of it. I didn't get into the game. And of course, there was a point where Bitcoin lost about 75% of its value, by the way. Right? But then it came back blazing. Right? But because we are not on top of these technologies and stuff like that, we're skittish when it comes to getting involved. Right? These are things that we can do, and we have enough voices around to be those voices of reason, to go to people when folks need guidance. So think about those things if you're out there listening to my voice, and let us know. You could come hop on, join KWAZ Radio. In the comments, Dorico Cooper said something interesting. He said, I have been inside Gaddafi's house when I was in Benghazi in 2011. One of my buddies actually had a face-to-face with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a brilliant man. I would like to hear more about that. I would like to hear more about that. I'm assuming Gaddafi was under siege when that happened, right? I've now forgotten the years now. Benghazi was 2011. Damn, time is flying. But I'm assuming Gaddafi was under siege when that happened, right? So your friend had a conversation with Gaddafi under siege, and because Gaddafi died in October 2011, right. So yeah, so you have to be under siege, man. That's a crazy story. I'd like to hear more about that. How did he interact with Gaddafi, etc.? So lace us with more. Let me finish this paper and I'll get back to your comments. Where was I? All right, so basically, Bishop is talking about, we don't want any foreign ownership of our newspapers in Grenada, and we don't want no one-man ownership of no newspapers in Grenada. We reject that completely. It can only mean that the views that get reflected here are the views of that one-man minority. As to what steps the government intended to take, Maurice Bishop felt at the time of the interview it was premature for him to go into that. Right? Subsequent to the interview, Torchlight was closed down by the government. So this brings us to a section called People's Mandate. Prime Minister Bishop pointed out that in a country like England, where they had spent several centuries developing their democracy, where people could sit and weigh and could see 10 points of view and choose one, that it was all right, maybe. He said that in the situation of Grenada, with backwardness, illiteracy, superstition, rumor mongering, certain functional illiteracy, most people could hardly even fully appreciate the one statement in front of them. How, quote, how are they going to sift up 3 and 4, he asked. And that's a great point, right? And by the way, if your leadership is cool with you being illiterate, and I'm talking like technologically now, right? If that leadership is cool with you being illiterate, that's not leadership that you need or want, right? Well, anytime folks want you to be ignorant, which is what a lot of our black talking head, like Tariq Nasheed and them, I must just say it, Tariq Nasheed and them want you to be ignorant. They don't want you questioning anything. Just listen to what they say. Any man who wants you to remain ignorant is a man who's going to take advantage of you. That's his aim, to take advantage of you. Ask about when his government would seek a mandate from the people through elections. Prime Minister Bishop said, well, so far as mandate is concerned, quite frankly, I don't think we could have had a better mandate than the 13th of March. Beware the Ides of March. He thought that the people, no, the Ides of March is the 15th actually. He thought that the people themselves, by the very fact of taking part in the revolution as they saw it, provided a mandate. He said that in terms of the Constitution itself, Gary had not been running the country under any constitution. He had been running under the guise of constitutionality, while in fact ignoring everything that the Constitution required. All right? Your leader is supposed to follow the Constitution that the people, right, put together. They felt that there was a strong sentiment in the country that was not interested in elections at this time. The people were interested in seeing the country go forward and seeing the economy stabilize. Quote, I am 100% clear in my mind that at a minimum, the vast majority of people in this country would see an election at earliest 5 years from the 13th of March, he said. Because that is how they see 13th of March, as having in effect been an election. And therefore, even under the old system, it was every 5 years. And there are people who are telling us around the country 10 years and 15 years. Quote, we have taken no position in anything like that. And we're still not taking any position on that, end of quote. Quote, what we are saying very clearly is that we are willing to hold elections. We are committed to that. That remains the case, but we're not going to be stuck to any time period. Depends on the objective situation in the country. He said that what they were concerned to do in the interim was to lay the basis for genuine democratization of the society. Democracy from the grassroots up through the organization of people in the villages. He pointed to the people's working brigades as weekly democracy. He also cited the public health primary health program. This, he said, was 1,000,000 times better than once in every 5 years, 5 seconds democracy when you put an X, right? And that's true in the Caribbean, especially, boy. All right? You only see democracy when you vote. And after that, it's complete bullshit. People for the first time would be really involved. They felt people related much more to it than this X business. right? And I understand how Bishop is talking here, right? This X business is just a moment, takes 5 seconds, right? You do it every 5 years routinely like robots, but what's changing in between time? It's better to have a leadership that, you know, maybe it takes 10 years to do it, you know, but at the end of it, or in fact, during that time, you're seeing progress, right? You're seeing progress. And these are the type of challenges you got to start thinking about now. You can't wait until you're on the doorsteps of nationhood to start thinking about this stuff. This is what your political organizations need to be talking about now. Like, what's the best way to go about leadership roles, right? Do we do it the old school way, right? Where, you know, do we do it like a parliamentary type leadership, right? You know, how do we do it? What are the things that should be done during each time period of leadership, right? In other words, what I'm saying is, and again, this will be in your constitution. So what I'm saying is, like, if you give a chance for person X and his group to be the leadership of your nation, and a year passes and none of the shit that they said they were going to do has commenced, even the simpler shit, then call an election and get them out of it. Let's not wait 5 years, right? Let's not wait. I mean, time is ticking. Yeah, time is ticking. Hey, let me tell you something. The first prime minister of my country was in power for about 20 years, right? And I was a young man able to vote and help to vote in the opposition party. And crazy as it is, that's 30 years ago. Time is ticking. We ain't got all, we don't have time to give you 20 years for minimal results. And, you know, elections every 5 years within those 20. No, we ain't got time for that. So I kind of understand where Bishop is coming from. Look, let's get this, and this done right now. And after we get this done, we could go to an election. If you didn't like what we did, then you vote us out. Fine. All right? But let's not just go and vote every, you know, the next election cycle just because. I get where he's coming from. To continue. Asked his reaction to suggestions that his was a Marxist-Leninist government during the Marxist-Leninist road, Prime Minister Bishop said, quote, "We say we are socialists. We have defined what we mean by socialism. We've done it 100 times. Every time we stand on a platform, we are doing it. Every time we defend a particular issue, we are doing it." End of quote. This brings us to a section called Future Growth. Quote, "I know what we are. I know what I am. I call myself socialist. And I say there is a program and a policy we follow that will tell you what we are." On the future growth of Grenada, Prime Minister Bishop said that they were going to build a national economy around 3 pillars: agriculture, fisheries, and tourism, right? Which makes sense for a Caribbean nation. They intended to increase agricultural production to deal with the question of import substitution, saving foreign exchange, which could then be used to buy all the various forms of equipment and machinery that they needed to build the economy. In line with this, they were going to expand agro-industrialization using as a base the raw materials they now produce, moving into the area of processing cocoa, right, in particular, but also nutmegs and bananas. If you guys don't know, on the thumbnail that I have for this video, for this episode is the Grenadian flag and Maurice Bishop. In the center of the Grenadian flag, that symbol is the nutmeg. Nutmeg is the biggest export. And I think Grenada, and if you guys don't mind in the chat room, if you could look that up for me, I think Grenada might be number 2 in the world in terms of producing nutmeg. All right. They mentioned bananas here too. One of their neighboring countries, Dominica, was the biggest producer of bananas in this Caribbean region. And the U.S. went and destroyed that when the U.S. started to source their bananas. They used to get it from Dominica at one time. They started to source their bananas from Mexico. Got it dirt cheap, and really kind of killed the banana industry in Dominica. Look that up. Right? Again, our proximity is a bit of a problem, right? But you guys look that up for me. Where does Grenada rank with nutmeg? I know at one time for certain they were like number 2 in the world. He thought the fisheries had tremendous potential, which had never been exploited. The fishermen in Grenada were still fishing in 1979, just like Peter and Paul were fishing the Sea of Galilee in the days of Christ. They would like to move into a fisheries industry where they would have canning or salting and drying with a view to exporting, as well as providing more protein for the people. You know that they had a very good tuna bank, which they were going to develop. I didn't know that. Tuna, huh? Okay. I didn't know that. In the area of tourism, he said the major problem was that the industry, in terms of the substance of it, was owned, controlled, dominated, and exploited by outsiders. Right? He pointed out, you see, again, these guys have recognized who the enemy is. Right? They know who's the insiders. They know who are the outsiders. They recognize the enemy. But we today in 2021 still don't know, as a group, don't know who our enemy is, right? We don't follow the paper. Still in 2021, we're not following the paper. In the area of tourism, he pointed out that Holiday Inn had about 60% of the bed space, bought most of its food from outside, and exported most of its profits. He also said that it was in Grenada on a tax concession. See, now we talking some shit that really starts to boil my blood, right? This is what happens. Happens in Jamaica, happens in the Bahamas. These companies are outsider owned. They come in, they make their money, and they send a dollar out of the local community. So the tourism in the Bahamas, for example, that tourism money doesn't trickle down to the regular folks. You go in Nassau, in New Providence, you go to in capital right now. Some of those homes and businesses that were just hanging on since since the 90s. You go and they're still there, looking the same, right? Carrying on the same way. The people are the same way, sitting down. You know, just trying to figure out what's next to do, right? Meanwhile, there's folks making bank off Bay Street, right? Downtown, right? Making bank off cruise ships, off of hotels, off of their boutique stores on the strip, you know? But the average person doesn't see that money, right? Grenada has dropped to number 8 now. Okay, Dorico Cooper looked it up. He said Grenada is number 8 now. At one time, Grenada was higher. For sure. At one time, Grenada was high. I'm pretty sure they were higher. Tanzania is number 7. Okay. Interesting. All right, thanks for that, by the way. Thanks for looking that up. I couldn't look it up right now, so thanks. He said that there was no linkage between the tourist economy and the rest of the economy. Tourists did not buy food from Grenada, but from outside, and I've seen that my whole life growing up. Right? This is gonna sound crazy, right? This is gonna sound crazy. When I was a kid growing up home, I thought Popeye's Chicken was a Bahamian-owned store. I didn't have TV from the States. I didn't know. I thought Popeye's Chicken was something Bahamian. Because it's not uncommon for Bahamian, you know, stores or whatever, or Caribbean stores for that matter, to name themselves after something that's like American cartoon or something like that, right? American show or something like that, or some catchphrase. I really thought it was a Bahamian thing. I was surprised when I came to the States and I realized, wait a minute, this is the same Popeyes we have home, right? That means I was a young adult when I realized it. If you've ever been to the Bahamas, to Nassau in particular, and you go downtown, Bay Street, you see stuff like Sabaros and all this old shit. That's American stuff. Because we don't eat that stuff really and truly, right? The average Bahamian ain't downtown on Bay Street eating in stores down there like that, right? So it's true, those stores are down there. Those are American stores. And the problem that we're dealing with in my hometown is the same problem Grenada was dealing with in theirs. When the tourists go to a store, they go to what they recognize. They recognize some American shit, they're going to that shit. They're not going down in the Grove, you know, over the hill or something like that and eating a conch snack or a chicken in the bag or something like that. They eat what they know. And what they know is gonna benefit the pockets of their own people back home. Right? And so that's one of the things I wish these Caribbean countries would kind of tighten up on. If folks want to come to your country, make them come and have an immersive experience. Make them come and spend their money with the ladies selling conch fritters or the people selling chicken in the bag or something like that. Right? Don't just come and spend your money right with these American institutions again. That's what we got to tighten up. Tourists do not buy handicrafts from Grenada. Most of the handicrafts seen were made in Taiwan and Hong Kong. I don't know if that's the case in my hometown so much, but that's something I gotta look into. Yet there were hundreds of very skillful handicrafts people in Grenada. Absolutely. The stuff that Caribbean people could do with straw baskets and straw hats and all that kind of stuff. Come on. Right? When folks come to these countries, they're supposed to be spending their money on products from that country. So it looks like, you know, Bishop saw that, you know. They would like to achieve vertical and horizontal linkage between the tourist economy and the rest of the economy. They would also want to bring the tourism industry under the ownership and control of the people of Grenada. All right? The most immediate move was not to get more hotel buildings, but to raise the level of occupancy. They had a very small tourist plant, 710 beds or thereabouts. That was one hotel in North America, could be a half a hotel. The promotion had not been very effective, and therefore, very often it operated with 35 to 40% occupancy. The first aim was to raise that. They were also going into a national airline. They hoped that in that way to get into interlining arrangement with some of the companies flying out from America and Europe, tagging on Grenada as an extra stop. They were also looking at the Caribbean tourist market, which they felt was there and important. See, Bishop was sensible and kind of ahead of his time there. You know, the Caribbean tourism market is flourishing more so now. In the last, say, 20 years, I would estimate, right? You could actually go on a cruise now to the Caribbean and be shocked at the number of other Caribbean folks on a cruise going throughout the Caribbean. You can be absolutely shocked. At least I was. And this was, you know, maybe 15 years ago. So this brings us to a section called Will Not Return. Part of the problem, he said, was the lack of infrastructure. Well, you charge a tourist $100 a day or 120 a day, and he pulls the chain and no water comes. He's not likely to come back, he said. They had to deal with the water problems and other aspects of the infrastructure problem, lights, roads, etc. They intended to spend a lot of time and attention on it. An international airport was a #1 concern. He expected to be meeting Prime Minister Joe Clark in Canada the next week. One of the things he would be raising with him was the question of the Canadian International Development Agency allocation for the feasibility study, a US $500,000, which had been promised, but which apparently was frozen, and the possibility of making some contribution towards the actual building of the airport. As memory has it, that was one of the things America was talking about when they invaded, that the Russians were helping them build this airport, right? And Russian jets and whatnot was going to be able to land in Grenada, right? And remember, the Cold War was still going on at that time. In terms of the structure of the economy, they saw a state sector, a cooperative sector, and a private sector. In terms of the private sector, he says some people were getting worried because of the coke factory issue and other issues like that. Their position was simple. This was the 20th century, when there were enlightened businessmen who were prepared to work within rules that were reasonable, with profit margins that were reasonable, and did not try and cheat, were willing to understand that workers had rights and must be allowed to unionize once the majority expresses that wish. The government could deal with them. Once they got those guidelines going, they saw a role for the investor, but investors had to operate with a certain set of guidelines. On the external front, Prime Minister Bishop said that they want to follow a policy of non-alignment. This did not mean neutrality, because they were committed to certain principles: anti-imperialism, anti-Zionism, anti-racism, and anti-colonialism. All of these things were basic to them. They believed that it was important for small countries in particular to be allowed to build their own processes in their own way, free from outside interference, free from the use or threat of force. That was one of the reasons why they were so concerned about Carter's recent speech and the tension it was going to create in the region. They saw it as an attempt to use the excuse of the Soviet combat unit in Cuba to give them the right to intervene militarily and otherwise in the region. This is what we were talking about. Quote, we reject that completely. We do not live in anyone's backyard, and we are not accepting the right in America or anybody else to instruct us on our foreign relations, to tell us who our friends must be, or to tell us what we can do, he said. All right? By the way, that's how people with balls talk, right? We are going to defend what we have built. We believe that the people of our country have gotten to the point where they are going to fight to protect the revolution, Prime Minister Bishop said, right? That last part right there, and by the way, that's the end of the paper, right? We reject that completely. We do not live in anyone's backyard, and we are not accepting the right in America or anybody else to instruct us on our foreign relations, to tell us who our friends must be, or to tell us what we can do, right? That's the problem with not having a counter power, or power to counter the American one, right? Right? That's the problem. You see. And that's what we have to remedy soon. We can't keep doing the same thing we've been doing, right? We cannot keep doing the same thing we've been doing. Good evening. I see Daily Affirmations with Pauline. Oh, bye, Pauline is here. She's saying good evening to Daily Affirmations by Pauline. That's the end of the paper. Let me go back to what Derico Cooper was saying. Remember, he said that he had been inside Gaddafi's house when he was in Benghazi in 2011. One of my buddies actually had a face-to-face with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a brilliant man. He had an office called the Gaddafi before Gaddafi was being targeted by the West. He had an office call. Okay, he had an office call with Gaddafi before Gaddafi was being targeted by the West. Okay. I was embedded with the rebels as a war photographer in Benghazi. Wow. Wow. Benghazi, Misrata, and Daphnia. Some of my photos were published in National Geographic, The Pentagon, and others. Respect to Dorico Cooper Photography, man. Wow. So Dorico, if this is the case, you'll be the second person I met who, the first being a guy, he's an older guy. He was in Vietnam and he was a photographer. He learned photography while in the Vietnam War. And is that something that happened with you? Did you go in a photographer, or is that something you developed, pun intended, while in the military? Right? That's an interesting story, man. Right? That's an interesting story. So you worked with the rebels. I mean, not worked with, but you were around the rebels. Interesting. What were the rebels saying about Gaddafi? Did they really believe that he needed to be taken out? Or was that something that they were influenced to believe? Right? I'm going to take a station ID break and come back and hear what Dorico Cooper Photography has to say. But that's deep. I appreciate hearing stories like that. All right? I'll be back in a sec.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Also check out the Queen's Council Podcast on KWAZ Radio. I usually don't do this. Most of the times I talk about the Discord, but there's also a Cash App. I want to thank you guys who have donated to the Cash App recently. You can Cash App me at $bittermeds, BITTERMEDZ. Any funds I get goes to improving the Discord or improving the podcast in some way. The next target I have for the podcast is to get it back on RSS feed, get it back on podcast apps. Get it back on podcast apps, so folks who work that third shift, especially for folks who are on the road, etc., you guys can listen to the show on podcast app. You guys won't believe how many people are hitting me up all the time. Hey brother, when are you getting back on, when are you putting new episodes on the podcast apps and stuff like that? And I want to be able to do that next. So if you can, donate to the Cash App, $bitter meds, like you see on the screen there. Right? Dorico Cooper says he developed that craft while in the Marines. That's dope. That's real interesting, man. And to have your photographs be in those publications is really dope too. You guys make sure check out Dorico Cooper Photography, follow his channel, join the Discord, look at all the stuff the game he drops about investing on the Discord. Him and Kevin Care 42 are staunch supporters of the Discord. They're always putting up new information. Before we leave, Dorico, if you want to drop a tip, a stock market tip, you could do that too. It'll be much appreciated. But that's the paper, guys. What do you guys feel of the paper? What did you take away in your mind and hearts and soul about Maurice Bishop? Was Maurice Bishop on the right kind of wavelength about revolution, about building up his nation? What were your thoughts about Maurice Bishop? And once I get a few responses about that, we'll call it a wrap for the show today. What were your thoughts on Maurice Bishop? How many of you didn't know about Maurice Bishop until now? I know the Pro-Black Perspective did a show discussing Bishop in the past. I think one of his speeches. What do you guys think of Bishop? Is he your kind of revolutionary leader? Is he the kind of leadership you think we need in terms of building? I mean, he's gone now, but you think that spirit, that thinking is what's needed in terms of building a nation, a power base right now? In the chat room, Dorico Cooper Photography says they want to take him out themselves. Talking about the rebels. I actually stayed with a local Libyan whose son was captured by Gaddafi's forces. And I was there when his son called on the satellite phone to say he escaped. Wow. Wow, okay. So, Dorico, let me ask you this before I sign out. We often hear about what Gaddafi had done in Libya, right? Right. Like you'll hear people talk about, you know, healthcare or something was free and he gave money to pregnant women and stuff like that. Was that what you saw in Libya? Did you see a case of Gaddafi did a lot in the country, like what some of these memes and, you know, different statements say? Right? Did you see that yourself? And once you answer that, I'll sign off tonight. In the chat room, KW Don 7 says Del Jones used to talk about Maurice Bishop. Didn't Del Jones die? Yeah, Del Jones died, right. I know I wasn't tripping. Okay, so Del Jones is talking about him, right, okay. Daily Affirmations by Pauline says she didn't know about it. Dorico Cooper's photography's stock tip is we must unite. Blockchain and NFTs is a rally point for black folks. You heard it right there. If you got into Dogecoin when it was 1/3 of a cent and you recently sold when it went to like, you know, if you had a considerable amount and you recently sold when it went to like 40 cents, you're looking kind of good right now, right? You're looking kind of good right now if you had good quantity, right? Yeah, Dorico Cooper says free education to the doctorate level. Says some loved him, some hated him. KW Don said Del Jones died in 2006. Yeah, he died so long ago now that you know, sometimes someone dies, some celebrity, some old head celebrity or something, and you're like for example, Hank Aaron died about a month ago, right? Maybe more, but Hank Aaron died, and honest to God, in my mind, I had thought Hank Aaron had died already. You know, no disrespect to the brother, but you know, sometimes these things happen, you know, or in reverse, like I just gave the Hank Aaron example. You know, sometimes it happens that people die so long ago, you forget that they in fact died. In fact, it happens all the time on social media. Someone will post an article that James Brown died or something. James Brown been dead. You know, and you have to second guess yourself, like, you know. Dorico Cooper Photography ads, he says free apartment, free education to the doctorate level, right? So there were some things that he did, and like Dorico Cooper said, some people loved him, some people hated him. But I'm glad to be able to shed some light on Maurice Bishop. Bishop, like I said, would have been a contemporary of my uncle. And unfortunately, you know, when they invaded, or just prior to the invasion of Grenada, you know, Bishop was killed. Bishop and a few others, actually. You know, in fact, let me find some notes on it real quick, and I'll tell you. So Bishop headed the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada from 79 to 83. When he was dismissed from his post, and then he was executed during the coup by Juan Bernard Cord, leading to this upheaval. When the upheaval happened, as memory would have it, you guys might not know this, but Grenada has an American medical school down there. And the US also used that as an excuse too. They claim to be fearful that US citizens down in the medical school would start to be killed. In fact, there were reports that that was happening. And, you know, all of these things the US used as an excuse. When you go to Wikipedia and you read about Bishop's arrest and execution, it says in 1983, disputes among the party leadership occurred. A military junta group within the party tried to make Bishop either step down or agree to a power sharing agreement with Deputy Prime Minister Bernard Cord. So, you know, if Bishop was the Prime Minister and this went on with the Deputy Prime Minister, what does that tell you? Bishop, you know, the thing that you see most times, right? The right-hand man. Bishop rejected these proposals and was eventually deposed and placed under house arrest during the first week of October 1983 by Cord. Large public demonstrations throughout the island demanded Bishop's freedom and restoration to power. During one demonstration, the crowd freed Bishop from house arrest. First in a truck, then by car, Bishop made his way to the Army headquarters at Fort Rupert, known today as Fort George. After he arrived, a military force was dispatched from Fort Frederick to Fort Rupert. Bishop and 7 others, including cabinet ministers, were captured. Then a 4-man People's Revolutionary Army firing squad executed Bishop, 3 members of his cabinet, and 4 others by machine gunning them. After he was dead, a gunman slit his throat, cut off his finger to steal his ring. The bodies were then transported to a military camp, partially burned in a pit. The location of their remains is still unknown. Partly as a result of Bishop's murder, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, and the nations of Barbados and Jamaica appealed to the United States for assistance, as did Grenada's Governor General Paul Scoon, and US President Ronald Reagan launched an invasion. Now you know how he died. Yeah, now you know more about what he stood for, right? And let me tell you something. They don't kill you. They don't depose you from leadership and kill you, right? For nothing, right? Listen to what they did that man, right? And he was trying to change. See, that's the thing too. Like when you try to change the status quo, you're enemy number one. Especially when people were when it was advantageous to the people prior. Like I said in this paper, they talked about illiteracy. If you could keep people dumb or thinking dumb or focus on dumb shit, you could take advantage of them. Here comes a guy who's trying to educate his people, trying to wisen them up, trying to industrialize the nation, trying to set it on a path where it could stand on its own 2 feet, and boldly telling you, we don't give a good damn about no America. We ain't in no one's backyard. We're in our own land. Right? We are in our own land. We can determine who we cool with, who we ain't cool with. Right? That's when they took him up. You understand? And sad to say, it's your own people that they get to do this shit. Because I know some Grenadian guys who are a little bit older than me who told me about what was going on, because they were in the brigade and all that kind of stuff. The same brigade we talked about in this paper, a lot of those guys were youth members in the brigade that I know personally. And Kevin Care42 too knows some of those people I'm talking about. Right? Or at least knows of them. And they told me, man, they said way before the revolution and the happenings, there was these white folks from Britain, from the States, who were pretending to be teachers and all kind of stuff, living in Grenada with telescopic cameras, telescopic lenses, connected cameras, taking pictures of the area, talking to people and trying to pick their mouths and all that kind of stuff. So way before anything really happened, these folks were in there calculating, right? But of course, America will make it seem like they were called, right, to come through, when in reality they were watching this place because these guys mentioned the term socialism or being socialist, and they had their eyes on it, right? Dorico Cooper story says if they didn't have the degree plan you wanted to study, he would pay for you to anywhere in the world for school, with the caveat that you come back to Libya, which is what you're supposed to do. Libya was divided like MAGA or Obama 2.0 in 2011. Dorico Cooper says another great paper, they don't kill you unless you are a threat. Coach Peter's in the room. You guys check out Coach Peter as well. He says you are 100% right. The thing also to take, the last thing to take from this too, is understand that Grenada's people were willing to war. They were willing to fight. Are we willing to fight now? Right? I want to thank all of you who are here today. Let me go through the line. Coach Pete was here. Thanks for coming through. Dorico Cooper Photography was here. KW Don 7 was here as always. We had Daily Affirmations by Pauline. We had Kevin Care 42. I believe I said Dorico Cooper Photography already. We had Life with Nelly was here. The Pro Black Perspective was in the room. NYC Sports Archives was here. Black Excellence was here. NYC Beauties, I think I may have mentioned before. I want to thank all of you that were here today. And I'll be back again on Tuesday. Hopefully I have another interesting paper that everyone gets in on. And we can have a good time with that. You know, eventually I'm going to get back to doing topical episodes as well, where we just kind of sit and chop it up about what's going down around us right now. So look for that to come soon. But in any event, I'll see you guys again on Tuesday. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.